The Portland killer is 100% Antifa. Trump plans a Kenosha visit. The real riot costs in Minneapolis. General Flynn loses around in court, and more. Welcome, Team Buck. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you had a restful weekend. Second to last one of the summer. Amazing how quickly this whole thing has gone. And now we're about to enter the final leg of the presidential race. I have to say, this is a year that has blown away all the predictions. Nobody could have ever imagined not just COVID-19, but that the Democrats would put forward, support, foster, build a movement that would have as its mantra the destruction of major cities, the undermining of the very foundations of our system. Nobody could have really thought that would happen because it seems so counterproductive, even from the perspective of someone who desperately wants power. It seems like nobody could ever think that that's actually a good idea. Why would the Democrats do it? Well, as I've said to you, don't ever make the mistake of assuming that your opponents have good strategy. And also don't forget that when we talk about the way the left has taken over the Democrat Party, how the radicals are now calling the shots, Pelosi may be the vessel for their desires, and she gives this veneer of traditional Democrat respectability to people who aren't really paying attention. But we know that it's the AOC wing of the Democrat Party that's actually calling the shots. And that they have created with this movement a horribly destructive and completely indefensible, absolutely indefensible series of riots all across the country. This is what is going on now. Instead of focusing on how to make things better, the Democrat media has decided to make sure that everything gets worse for everyone. That was their plan to defeat Trump. And now it's starting to look a little bit unwise, isn't it? Now, all of a sudden, the polls have clearly turned, and I'm sure the internal polls for the Biden campaign, the Democrats looking at what the shot is for this weekend at Bernie's campaign to actually be successful, it's not good. It's not good. They understand that things are hugely problematic now for them when all they had to do was not be crazy, and they just couldn't manage it. They couldn't manage it. And the latest in this is what we saw with Antifa over the weekend. Let's all be very clear here. Antifa is a domestic terrorist group. And journos who lie to cover up or downplay the crimes of Antifa are propagandizing for a terrorist group. That's a fact. That's just an observation about the reality around us right now. Antifa has a coherent political philosophy, not an intelligent one or a helpful one, but it does have one. And they travel from all over the country. There's clear organization occurring across state lines. So this very quickly becomes a federal issue. And they use violence and coercion for political ends. This is the definition of a terrorist group. Attacking law enforcement. You know, oftentimes terrorists will start out, I mean global terrorist organizations start out attacking police, attacking what they view as the organs of the state. But eventually they always turn against the people who don't go with them as well. But remember, they're fighting at some level a campaign to win over some portion of public opinion. Antifa thinks they're doing the same thing. They are operating as a domestic terrorist group. And they killed somebody over the weekend. They committed what seems to be a straight-up murder in Portland. Now, there were these caravans driving into Portland over the weekend, as well as some other cities, of Trump supporters. And as I've said to you before, we all understand that if a Trump supporter shows up in a public place with a MAGA hat on or shows up with Trump flags or anything else, and these BLM protests are going on, it is the Trump supporter who can expect to suffer violence. This tells you everything you need to know about the nature and conduct of this BLM movement. Antifa, the same thing. Remember, Antifa is really now just a group of black bloc tactics used in the name of BLM. right? That's what you're seeing. Antifa thinks that they're fighting for the same cause as BLM because BLM is fighting against the fascism of the white nationalist racism of the Trump administration. So Antifa and BLM are really just two sides of the same coin. There's no important ideological separation. They work together. They fight together. They engage in terrorist acts together. And so we saw a person who was a Blue Lives Matter supporter, Trump supporter. We don't have all of the details quite yet, but a person who self-described as 100% Antifa murdered this Trump supporter. Just killed him in cold blood, from what we understand so far based on all the reporting that we've seen. There were also protests over the weekend in D.C., riots going on in other cities, too. I would just note that in D.C., they were having block parties right in downtown, right next to the White House. I know the area very well. I lived right near there. So I can see in these videos, I know what street they're on. They're very close in D.C. to the various federal agencies, the White House. They're right in the downtown, dancing and having a street. There's no social distancing. And a lot of people take their masks off when they're dancing. So they got no masks and no social distancing. And the media doesn't do any shaming of the defund the police BLM movement. They don't do any. Where's the CNN piece on this? It doesn't exist. They'll never do it. In fact, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in the aftermath of the murder over the weekend, but also just the mass destruction that has been occurring in all these cities, the horrible acts of the people that claim they're working for social justice. How does the media explain this now to the voting public? Not the MSNBC watchers in Brooklyn and San Francisco and Santa Monica and Northwest D.C. No, not them. How do the media outlets that have been supporters of this BLM movement, that have been coddling it, promoting it, protecting it, what do they say now? Now that the American people can see what's really going on, what claims will be made by the media apparatus that has been so essential to creating this movement? And they're not quite clear yet. Last week, it turned into, it's Trump's fault, which is what the Biden campaign is saying. Remember, there's going to be different messaging for different factions among the Democrat Party. So what they're going to tell the Biden voter establishment Democrats is just, blame Trump. But what are they going to say for other people who are true believers in the movement? They don't want to hear the Democrats are walking away from this. In fact, if you look at what the Democrat media's timeline has been, and it's fun, I did this over the weekend, just do some specific timed Google searches. You'll find the Democrat media has gone from the protests are the new civil rights movement. That was in the beginning. Sanctified, right? These BLM protests and the riots with them. There were riots from the beginning. Let's not forget that. There were never just peaceful BLM protests. It was always protest by day, riot by night, and riot in the name of BLM. But they've gone from the protests or the new civil rights movement to the protests are mostly peaceful to what riots? These are protests. So just denying they exist to now Trump supporters are causing these protest riots all in one summer. Just a series of lies piled atop lies. That's what they do. Another one that I've seen some of the true believers try is that they keep saying, and Don Lemon over at CNN has done this. Other writers I've seen have done this. Nicholas Kristof. Nicholas Kristof. It's not scary at all. The protests, they're just fine. It's not true. But they will say it's only a few blocks of downtown that are affected by this. No, we've seen 36 out of the 50 largest U.S. cities have big spikes in crime as well. The undermining of police isn't just an issue of a couple of blocks. It also pulls police resources from the rest of the city, right? So this line, riots only affect a few blocks of major cities. This is said really only by the dumbest or most dishonest, the worst journos to be sure. But they're desperate and they'll do anything. They'll say anything right now to help Joe Biden. By the way, police shootings, if we're going to talk about what's a small issue that people are making a big deal out of, police shootings involve less than 0.00003% of the U.S. population of over 300 million. But journos claim that it's a national crisis. You got maybe 10 people this year killed who are unarmed. And as we see, sometimes they're unarmed, but reaching for something that would make them armed, as in the case of Jacob Blake. It's not as clear as just unarmed in the back, therefore illegal, and it's a murder. But you're talking about maybe 10 people. You have thousands of businesses that are destroyed, hundreds of police seriously injured, and a few dozen people killed by these protest movements in different ways, whether during the riots or people that have lost their lives during looting that turned deadly. What exactly has any of this done to make life better for anyone in America? The answer is nothing. This is all a monster of the Democrat Party's creation. This is from within their party. They coaxed it forward. They supported it. They coddled it. They promoted it. And now they don't know what to do with it. Now what do they do? Now what do they say? Well, you're going to hear a bunch of different narratives until they can find one that they think sticks or until they can change the storyline. But they've got problems, my friends. The big COVID spike in the Sun Belt is pretty much over. Did not see the high fatalities of New York and New Jersey, not even close. And science is telling us that we are increasingly getting toward what could be herd immunity. But we're just doing it with the maximum amount of stupid political decision-making, pain, annoyance, irritation, and ineptitude possible. But BLM Plaza in downtown D.C. is described by some as a war zone. The Portland clashes over the weekend show that we are up against a domestic terrorist group and that your First Amendment rights, if you're a Trump supporter, your First Amendment rights, if you don't go along with this left-wing lunacy, are always subject to the bats, bricks, fists, and even guns of these left-wing terrorists. And that's the America we live in right now. And it's one that I hope the Trump administration does a lot to fight against between now and Election Day, because this has become the defining issue of this campaign. Do you believe in civil society, individual responsibility, law and order, safety in the streets, support for law enforcement, or Marxist agitators who are really just crybabies who won't take responsibility for their own lives, their own failures, and just make it all up as they go along so they can virtue signal for the Instagram shots? Choice is America's. What does COVID-19 have to do with you losing your house? Well, the FBI knows that cybercrime is up 75% since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and home title theft is a cybercrime. Here's how it works. The bad guys find your information online. Then they replace you with them on the title using a quitclaim deed. Guess what? You won't find out about this most of the time until you either get payments or a foreclosure notice in the mail. The usual identity theft services do not protect you. You need Home Title Lock. Home Title Lock creates a virtual barrier around your home's title. All you have to do is go to HomeTitleLock.com, use promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection, and you can check online to see if you're already a victim of this crime and don't even know it. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. You can also check to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it. What's the difference between the left and the right morally as we see these movements clashing? What is the essence, the character of the left-wing Antifa movement? Well, we have many ways of understanding this because there's so much video out there. There's so much that you can see for yourself. Hear their own words. You don't have to take my word for it. So there was a man who was murdered over the weekend in Portland by these left-wing radicals, murdered by people who think they're fighting against what is an imaginary fascism in America. And when they find out about this person being killed, you know what they ended up doing? Celebrating. Openly celebrating in the streets the murder of a man. And it's disgusting to see and hear, but you need to know You need to know what we're up against. You need to know what the other side says and how they act. Patriot Prayer founder Joey Gibson identified the victim as Aaron J. Danielson, who he said was a good friend. Danielson apparently also went by the name Jay Bishop. Shot and killed here. So we knew that this was eventually, you can't have people who think that they can defy police, as Antifa does, and have some moral license to destroy, to commit arson, to burn. Eventually, the destruction of property and the effort to burn down buildings and ruin businesses will turn to violence. The same way that you will see people who are violent with animals, especially at a young age. Eventually, they grow up. It always transitions usually into violence with people. It's a huge indicator. Destroying property in this way, lighting buildings on fire, that's something that you can expect leads to violence, and it did. But what does Antifa do when they find out that one of their own killed somebody, murdered someone? Play clip 1.
Y'all are not angry, you're not paying attention. If y'all are not angry, you're not with me. Everybody needs to realize what's going on in these streets. Our community can hold its own without the police. We can take out the trash on our own. I am not sad that a fucking fascist died tonight.
I am not sad that a blanking fascist died tonight and the crowd erupts into cheers. They murdered a person on the street. Murder on the street for their make-believe problem of fascism. These people are lunatics, folks. They're completely delusional. This is no more. It's actually less serious ideologically than even the people in ISIS who were talking about creating a global caliphate. The people that are claiming Trump is a fascist are living in a total delusion. But they think that justifies their behavior. They think that this is somehow the way forward for them. They'll continue on in this fight. It will be the best possible repudiation of all of this if the Democrat Party loses in this next election, because Black and Hispanic voters in enough places across the country come out and say, you know, the pandering and all that is one thing from Democrats, but when you're making our neighborhoods less safe, when you're making minority areas of cities, where there's a predominance of minority residents less safe, you're putting us at risk because a bunch of left-wing Wesleyan grads who live in, bourgeois areas of these cities decide that they want to seem like they're cool revolutionaries. When you do that, we've had enough. And there are some indicators that might happen. There's some reason to believe you might see, like I said, I'm not living in a fantasy. I don't think we're going to get 50% of the Black vote. If Trump even gets from 10%, which is what he got about the last time, to 15% or 20%, that could be the difference maker in Wisconsin, in Michigan, could be the difference maker in Pennsylvania, in Ohio. You start to look at these numbers. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot. And you're beginning to see the real pushback. It took months. It took longer than I thought it would, but it's now finally here. In June, I was asking, where's the backlash? In June, I was asking, where's the fight back? Now we're seeing it. These paramilitary maniacs of Antifa, they're not going to pull back. They don't think this is a time to do anything other than pedal to the metal. But the Democrat Party and the Biden campaign that wants to win, they've got problems. And as of today, they've started to recognize that. They see what this means for them. Oh, it's Trump's fault, they keep saying. That's the newest one. That's what you're hearing from Democrats in office across the country. It's the president's fault. Mayor Ted Wheeler, who I'm a little frustrated because I do think that he's trying really hard. He's pulling alongside de Blasio neck and neck for the worst, most incompetent mayor in the United States. De Blasio in New York, Wheeler in Portland. And I got to say, until recently, we were number one here for the worst mayor. I think we beat out Mayor Wheeler easily. But when you get a guy who on Friday, as he did, put out some smarmy letter about how Trump's help is not wanted for the city of Portland and it's his devices. Basically, you're the reason that all these bad things are happening in Portland. As if the mayor can't see the video of people who are clearly mentally deranged. I mean, there are a lot of emotionally disturbed incels with low IQs that are part of Antifa and that are part of these BLM protests in Portland. There's a lot of that. I mean, you watch the videos, you can tell that you have people who have a lot of problems. I mean, they're disturbed. These are not normal. It's not normal to want to run up to a police officer and hit him in the head with a brick as a form of entertainment. That's not something that a well-adjusted human being would do. And it's something that a person should be seriously and severely punished for. But that's not what ends up happening. In fact, in Portland, they've done this. We're just going to keep releasing. If we keep releasing people for protest-related offenses, maybe they'll be better behaved. Maybe they'll be nicer to us, right? That's what they'll say. And it never happens. No, it gets worse. Do you think the mob appreciates it when people go out of their way to appease it? No, they're feeding the beast, and the beast wants to be fed even more. Now it knows that it won't have any opposition. So on Friday, Mayor Wheeler is putting out some letter, and he's all proud. See, I'm slapping away Trump's hand as he extends it with help for Portland. And remember, Wheeler's never going to run for president, or if he does, it'll be like a hilarious joke. But he's not, this guy has no aspirations to run for president. Maybe he thinks he can run for Senate at some point. I don't know. But wouldn't it matter to you not to be the biggest laughingstock as a mayor in decades in the United States? Wouldn't that be a nice thing to achieve if you're Ted Wheeler? Maybe working across the aisle to secure your city at first? Wouldn't that make sense? No, instead, Wheeler says on Friday in his letter that he wants no help from Trump whatsoever. And here's the stuff that and then on Sunday, he is blaming Trump for the riots. So he won't take Trump's help, and then he's blaming Trump for the riots and saying, get out of our way or help us. Play 20.
You've tried to divide us more than any other figure in modern history. And now you want me to stop the violence that you helped create. What America needs is for you to be stopped so that we can come back together as one America while recognizing that we must demand that all people, black, brown, white, every color, from every political persuasion, pull together and hold all people accountable in stopping racism and violence. And we together are peaceful again under new leadership that reflects who we really are, we the people of this great nation. President Trump, you bring no peace. You bring no respect to our democracy. You, Mr. President, need to do your job as the leader of this nation. And I, Mr. President, will do my job as the mayor of this city.
Incoherent babble from this guy. It doesn't even make sense when you listen to it as I have for the third time. What? That Trump is the reason that lunatics are trying to burn down the federal courthouse in downtown Portland? It's Trump's fault? Trump is the reason that people are dressed in black from head to toe and attacking law enforcement officers, including Portland State Police, including federal officers who were deployed to calm things down and enforce the law? How is that Trump's fault? But you see, this is always in the background of all these Democrat complaints that you're seeing. The way the left does business, it's kind of a version of nice country you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it and you don't vote Democrat. Do what we say or else. You're already starting to hear it. The implied, and I think they'll get louder. I think they'll be more explicit. The implied threat of vote for Biden or else, man, the riots are going to get really bad. Vote for Biden or else, oh, you think this violence has been rough on cities. Wait till we do after that. Holding America hostage so that lunatic liberals can be in power. That's a central strategy now. What else are they going to do? Offer up Joe Biden's a loser and a third-rate intellect, and we all know it. Oh, if he's in charge, everything will be better. Sure. That would be a very foolish mistake if the American people make that call. But, we're 2 months out. Who knows? Who knows? The acting and soon-to-be full-on chief, although it's going to be quite a fight, I think, for Senate confirmation, Chad Wolf has been was talking about this and how Mayor Wheeler is basically an incompetent moron. Play 13.
Well, we've been asking Portland to do their job really for over 3 months now. What you see in Portland is an environment. They foster an environment. They foster an environment of this lawlessness and chaos. We've been asking the governor and others to send in the National Guard to address the violence so that you don't have dueling demonstrations. You don't have this violence that occurs night after night after night on the streets of Portland. So we need them to do their job. We need them to step up. And if they can't, or they don't have the ability or the resources, ask the federal government. We'll provide those resources as we've done in Wisconsin and others so that we can address any violence across the spectrum.
So you have on the one hand people in the federal government like Chad Wolf who are saying, yes, we want to help, but they need to actually, the people in charge of Portland, the local authorities need to do their job. They won't do their job. They won't do what they're supposed to do. They won't enforce the law. They've created these lawless zones, like in Seattle, the autonomous zone, except this is a riot zone. There's no right to do this. There's no, basis in ethics, in law, for trying to burn down buildings and ruin people's lives. But, it also brings you back to what Wheeler said about how if we get rid of Trump, then we can finally unify. I don't want to unify with Antifa. I don't want to have a come together with them. I want them to stop. I want them to be met with the necessary force to shut them down and punish them, because what they're doing is wrong. I don't accept that what they're doing is just their version of political discourse, and if only Trump was gone, we would know. These people said that Mitt Milquetoast Romney was giving old people cancer and was, binding women in binders or whatever. I mean, it's insane. That was, and Mitt Romney, of course, was a racist and everything else. They'll say this about anybody, anyone who stands in the way of the agenda. It doesn't matter who it is. You can't buy them off by being moderate. You can't buy them off by being reasonable. All they see when some Republican does the whole, I'm John Kasich and nobody likes me, but if I sell out my side, I'll maybe get one nice editorial about me in the New York Times pages. All the left sees is another sucker, another person that we're able to bring over to our side and, make sure that we do whatever we want with them. We can use them to the fullest extent possible. So I'm continuing to sit here waiting for there to be a crackdown from Democrats on this, but it won't happen unless and until the polls become so desperate that Democrats realize they're going to have to crack down on this. This is their base. These are Rachel Maddow watchers. These are HuffPo readers. These are people that believe all this stuff, that watch all this left-wing claptrap, that think that CNN is real news. That's who is involved in these protests. That's who we see doing all of this. And so they don't want to take action against them because it's their own team. It's like, a parent who has children in the park running around hitting all the other kids with sticks. Oh, little Timmy wouldn't do that. What do you mean? He just did it. They don't want to have to lay down the law at all. But if this continues, they're not going to have any choice, because it is getting increasingly impossible, even for the very relentless and ruthless propagandists of the Democrat Party, to explain to the American people how this isn't the fault of the Biden team, of Biden voters. They don't have an answer for that one yet. Until they find one, they're going to keep scrambling. America. You hearing those chants? You might think, well, that must be outside of a mosque in Tehran, right? I mean, this is not something that... No, that was just a big protest march in Oakland over the weekend. People yelling death to America. Now, I know that the CNN headline for that is going to be compassionate protesters call for nation-state euthanasia. I understand that they're going to try to spin that as something. Death to America is what they are chanting. I play it so you can hear it yourself. Okay, this is the problem. The Democrats, because of social media, normally they would have their news allies shut this stuff down, and we wouldn't even know about it. And then people in a few weeks would say, that never happened. Why are you lying by saying that happened? This is what they do all the time. The gaslighting is so well coordinated, but it's all over the internet. And it's shared on these social media platforms that yes, they will help the Democrats, but they can't move fast enough to pull all this off before enough people have seen it. They're chanting death to America. These are all Democrats. These are Biden voters, if they're going to vote at all. This is the left. There's nothing similar among conservatives. You don't have any death to America movement on the right. This is completely insane. But this is what we're up against. It's not just Portland. It's not just Minneapolis. It's Oakland. It's Atlanta. It's Chicago. It's D.C. It's New York. It's all the major cities now. This movement at least exists. And in some places, the movement has grown to the point where law enforcement, at least local law enforcement, doesn't have the political will and maybe honestly is somewhat afraid to take it on. That's what we're dealing with now. It's an insurgency that has grown to that point. So you have in Oakland, which has a long history of being a very anti-police city, a lot of the most vicious anti-cop stuff that you'll see stretching back for many, many years comes out of Oakland. But this is, as we watch this happen in cities across the country, let's all make sure that we understand that they're not going to stop until they're made to stop. They're true believers. I mean, they're not doing this for show. Yes, I do think that there are people who they're getting paid, certainly. BLM has raised a ton of money. There's an organization of Black Lives Matter. It's raised a lot of money. Corporate America writes it checks to, that's kind of their corporate indulgence, like the old medieval indulgences. You know, you pay the church and then you get away with doing bad things. So corporations write checks to Black Lives Matter so that then they don't have to worry about the fact that they've got, 8 guys sitting on their corporate board and 1 woman or something. But we wrote a check to BLM, so we're good, right? No, that's not how it works. BLM doesn't care. They'll take your money, but they're not going to treat you better afterwards if you get in the way. That's not how terrorists operate. What a transformation, isn't it, from the beginning of this? You think back to May when, look, I'll tell you, I was even concerned for my own ability to speak about this without suffering real ramifications. I spoke out anyway, but it was something I had to think about. There'll be a boycott against you. Any corporation that's associated with you. Fortunately, all my sponsors are great American companies that love this country and don't run away at the first sign of it, because the boycotts never last either. The boycott is just always a creation on social media of the left. It's effectively a lie, but companies panic. And during a pandemic, when they're already way down in sales and there's all kinds of problems they're dealing with economically, any economic pressure is magnified automatically. But you go back to the beginning of this whole thing in May when George Floyd was killed. George Floyd, who now the cop who killed him says he died of a fentanyl overdose. There's going to be quite a fight over that. Says that he did not put enough pressure on his neck to kill him. That's not true. That's the defense. I'm telling you what the defense says. And the autopsy supports that it at least was possible that he died of a drug overdose right then and there and not actually from asphyxiation, which is what would happen if someone's knee was on your neck blocking your airway. So, but this movement of BLM after George Floyd's death went from being unstoppable to soon, I think it's going to be a liability. It already has turned into a bit of a liability, but people will realize that they need to fade this thing out. The smarter members of the Democrat Party. This could end up costing the Democrats control of the United States government. This movement. Paradoxically, I know it seems, how could that even be possible? But it absolutely is possible. People are watching this, and with the president, we'll talk in a second about how the president's going to Kenosha. That of the over 100 people arrested for rioting in Kenosha in the last few days, they've found that they come from 44 different cities across America. They're not even from Kenosha. So you have to think, how do they do this? Where are they staying? Who's paying for this? I mean, they're all road tripping to Kenosha to riot. We're to believe they're all just doing this with the money they have in their own pockets. These people that are showing up to riot wearing all black, these people are losers. They're not folks that you would. And there are a lot. I'm just going to say it because I've seen the mugshots and I've seen the police reports. A lot of social workers, public school teachers. Pretty amazing. A lot of that. Yeah, social workers that are wanting to burn down buildings and throw rocks at people. That's who we have as social workers now. And public school teachers. A lot of them, too. Like, there are good teachers. There are a whole lot of bad ones. And the public school system in this country has turned into a decrepit mess. Well, it has been for a long time. But that's who you see. And then there's, of course, a lot of just unemployed. A lot of people that spent 2 years in some worthless master's program in the humanities only to figure out that nobody cares. They're not that smart. And this was not a good idea. And so now they just want to burn down the whole system and have their loans forgiven. Interesting.